yea, though I walk. I loved a man who was kind and gentle, whose voice was always soft when he spoke, and whose faith in his heavenly Father was strong. He led me to Christ when I was lost, and his late mother's wedding rings adorned my finger for the last 2 years. This was the man with whom I had sworn before God and family to love, to honor, and to cherish until death did us part. Now that same man emerged through the door from the house and entered into the garage where I stood, with my teeth gritted and blood boiling. He squared his body towards mine and glared at me with a foreign look upon his face. For a brief moment, I realized that I couldn't read his expression. I suspected that he was going to break down and hug me. It had been a ridiculous and unnecessary argument. I had said some terribly hateful things to him that he did not deserve, and for that I was beginning to feel very small. I was completely ready to apologize, and even on the brink of crying out of sheer humiliation for my erratic behavior. I prepared myself to feel the warmth of his arms around me, but his loving embrace is not what I got. I stood there with my hands passively by my side, my head lowered slightly, and I gazed up at him sheepishly. He began to move towards me, not slowly as if to hold me, not gracefully, not inviting, but with an unexpected quickness. In an act that was completely uncharacteristic of his docile personality, he shoved me with an inhuman strength that was so forceful my feet were wrenched from the ground. I soared backwards through the air several feet. My unexpected flight interrupted sharply as the back of my head hit the metal motorcycle ramps that hung on the garage wall. They rattled loudly with the impact as I fell into some boxes on the floor. The heavy ramps swung precariously over my head, threatening to fall and crush me. But fortunately for me, they steadied. I turned my focus to the one I adored in disbelief that he had just assaulted me. I attempted to free myself from the surrounding boxes, which seemed to magically grow arms that held me back. Half afraid and half angry, I knew that I needed to get into a better position to defend myself should more attacks follow. But before I could even begin to get up, an unusually commanding voice rang in my ears. "No, you stay down!" The next several minutes would forever change me, mentally, physically, and spiritually. The man I loved, and who had vowed in front of our families to love me, abandoned his stationary position and leapt upon me, pinning me to the concrete floor. I was still trying to process the situation when I felt something strike the side of my head. The impact was so hard that it was actually audible. I could feel the force behind the object, but oddly, I felt no accompanying pain. Is he hitting me? I pondered as another blow stung the side of my head. The gears in my mind creaked into motion as I realized that my circumstances had escalated more swiftly than I could process and respond. Before I could shield myself, I had absorbed the full impact of multiple strikes. His punches bounced my head off the concrete floor and split open the flesh behind my ear. I was in shock. Is this really happening to me? My mind questioned feverishly. The answer, though obvious, was too painful to comprehend. Nevertheless, it had to be faced. My senses screamed at me to protect myself. I was in trouble, and I had to do something fast. I curled into the fetal position and tried desperately to cover my battered skull with my arms. I kicked wildly in the hopes of landing a solid strike that might stop the attack, but my futile flailing was to no avail. The devastating blows just kept coming. I knew that I needed to do something, but my mind was blank with unhelpful, scrambled information. I was desperate to escape, but I couldn't think of anything to do. Mind-numbing panic set in. "I'm sick of you! I'm sick of you!" he was growling through clenched teeth. Precious seconds lingered on, as if they were caught in the time-stopping power of a mysterious black hole. At long last, a reprieve from the pounding presented itself, as the man I married erected himself to catch his breath. In complete shock, I lay there, limp and shaking. I wanted to flee, but paralyzing fear prevented me from acting. Is it over? Was that it? Do I dare get up now? My mind raced. The answers to my silent questions came in the form of a sharp pain on the back of my leg. Totally unprepared for this new sensation, I absorbed the entire impact of his steel-toed boot into the back of my unsuspecting leg. I clenched my body in response, hoping to deflect some of the blows with sheer muscular tension. Time and time again, he reared back and brought the leather-covered metal into my legs. I squirmed helplessly against the raging attack, and in doing so, I inadvertently exposed my back to him. Pain seared through my body as his thrusting boots found my fragile, unprotected back. I heard myself release an agonizing wail. As, for the first time since the barrage began, I submitted to the torturous misery that was my reality. I reached my hand behind my back in a futile attempt to block another kick, desperate to stop the pain, but helpless to do so. Then there was nothing, at least nothing that remains in my mind of the next few moments. I can only guess as to the events that occurred during this spatial void in my memory. But the next thing I recall, I was coming to the realization that I had somehow been dragged out into the open and flipped over onto my left side. I was pinned to the ground, and the two of us were both panting with exhaustion. "I hate you," he snarled at me. "I hate you too," I returned. "I should kill you. I wish you would." I didn't mean it. I didn't want to die. But at the same time, I felt that my life was already over. I was badly battered and bruised. I wondered how I would ever face the world again with any kind of strength or self-confidence. I feared that my years in martial arts had ultimately failed me, and that I was no safer in my own skin than I had been that day in 7th grade when Greg Smith had tried to assault me on the way home from school. I had barely escaped from his perverse advances back then with no training, and now, even with advanced self-defense skills, I had floundered once again. Just when I thought the attack was over, I felt myself being pulled in an upwards motion. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I gathered what little mental and physical strength I had left and struggled to prevent his attempts. His hand tightened around my wrist, and as I glanced down at his white-knuckled grip, I remembered something. I knew how to escape from this hold. This might be my only chance to end this assault. I could break his grip and potentially change the ending of this dreadful nightmare. Using the techniques I had learned during my extensive instruction, I skillfully escaped from his grasp and put him into a finger lock. For a moment his attention was diverted to the discomfort in his fingers. His body contorted from the pain. He released his grip on me, and for a brief moment it seemed that the tide had changed. I was sure that I had defeated him now. I only wanted him to let me go and leave me alone so that I might grieve this horrific event in solitude. I was unaware of how badly I was hurt. The idea that I might need medical care never entered my thoughts. I was only thinking that I must somehow stop this monster from controlling my husband. I reasoned that the only way to bring back the gentle man that I had married was a show of force from me. I tried to prepare myself mentally for the crunch that would pierce the temporary silence when I broke his fingers. Fighting internally with this inevitability, I hesitated as I realized there was no way that I could bring myself to permanently damage the hand that had so delicately placed the heirloom rings upon my finger that I still wore on this day. I loved him. I couldn't bring myself to hurt him because I loved him. No matter what he was doing to me now, I couldn't bear the thought of causing him any pain. This was my husband, the man who lay down with me every night, the face I woke up to every morning, and the father whose eyes I saw mirrored in my infant son. I abandoned my position and released my grip on him, hoping that he would submit to my display of power and call off his attack. But my show of mercy was met with moments that are forever locked away in the recesses of my memory. The events that took place during that empty space are as dark and forgotten as 1,000 black midnights in the Georgia swampland. Lost for all eternity, the only evidence that those moments even existed was the swollen bruises that encircled each of my eyes for the next several weeks. When I returned to my senses again, I could hear his voice. "Are you done?" he was yelling at me. Am I done? I thought, looking up at my husband, who was presently poised over me with his fist drawn back, ready to strike again. Clearly, my weak attempt to stop the assault had only served to provoke him further. "Get off me!" I demanded. I was trying to sound authoritative, but instead my voice was frail and pitiful. I lay pinned on my left side on the cold cement floor. My right arm had gotten stuck in the pocket of my jacket, but I still had it stretched out in defense. I wondered how I was going to get it out without provoking another beating. Quickly assessing my precarious situation, I noticed that my right leg was up and cocked in the ready position. Perhaps if I kicked him just right, I could get him off me. It was the only move I had. Should I do it? Should I kick him? I wondered frantically. I had the perfect shot. I envisioned that I could potentially end this with one strike. This might be my last chance to get him off me long enough for me to get back on my feet. But after my previous failed attempt, fear and self-doubt surged through my veins. I didn't know if the kick would buy me enough time to gain the upper hand or just enrage him even more. "Are you done?" he repeated threateningly. I had a decision to make, and it had to be now. Submit myself to the possibility of more pain, or let this man know that I would take no more abuse from him. No, I thought defiantly, I am not done. My brow hardened as my right foot shot out like an arrow, which planted itself firmly on his left hip. My assailant husband went flying backwards with a look of surprise on his face. He backed straight into his motorcycle, which swayed precariously as though it was going to tip over. Flailing his arms, he attempted to steady himself. I had not anticipated this scenario, and I shuddered at the thought of what would happen to me if his prized possession was damaged because of what I had just done. Abandoning my plan to get up, I found myself worried more about the repercussions of bruising the bike than I was about the contusions on my own body. As the cruiser steadied and my husband regained his balance, a sense of relief came over me. But it was brief. There was no mistaking the expression that faced me now. I was going to pay for what I had just done. Paralyzed with fear, my swelling brain could not wrap itself around the onslaught that consumed me. What happened next will always be a mystery to me. Those moments are lost forever, either in a state of shock or unconsciousness. When I found myself again, I was lying face down on the unforgiving concrete slab. The pressure on my back let me know that he was straddling me. Something bumpy was snaking its way around my neck. I reached up to grab it and recognized it immediately as the hose to my steam cleaner, which sat nearby. As I struggled with the coil, it was getting tighter and tighter. Instinctively, I stretched out my neck and grasped at the hose, trying desperately to pull it off of me. My windpipe began to buckle under the pressure. As I struggled to breathe, I remembered my martial arts training. Tuck your chin, I reminded myself. I plunged my head down as hard as I could, as though I were trying to crush a walnut between my chin and my chest. It worked. New oxygen flowed into my lungs, and though I was relieved, I wondered how long I could hold this position. I lay there quietly, thinking surely he wasn't really going to kill me. The ribbed hose gave a little as it stretched across my throat. I stayed as still as I could, head pounding and mind racing. For a moment, all was quiet. We had reached a stalemate. Slowly, he let up on his grip and the hose loosened around my neck. In desperation, I began to struggle to free myself. I bucked him off of me and spun myself out from under him. Now I was face up and ready to make my escape. That was when the second coil went around my neck. Again, I tucked my chin, but with the first coil already in place around my neck, the second one made it impossible for me to defend myself. The hose constricted around me like a deadly python. I was trapped. I tried to reassure myself that this man, my husband, who told me every day that he loved me, who fathered my only son, and whose arms I slept in every night, was not the kind of man who would see this act of violence through to the end. I reminded myself that he was a Christian and that he would show me mercy. As the world around me began to spin, the reality of my dire situation became very apparent to me. There was nothing more I could do to save myself. It was over, but I didn't know how over it would be. In the back of my mind, I knew that, deprived of oxygen, a person would pass out within a matter of seconds. If the asphyxiation continued, brain damage would follow, and death would occur in approximately 4 to 6 minutes. The question was, how long would he incapacitate me in this manner? I wondered if he knew the duration of time it would take to actually kill me. Would I wake up in paradise, or would I become a vegetable? I didn't know, and in my rapidly deteriorating state, all rational thoughts abandoned me. My mind wandered to illogical places as darkness began to invade my visual ability. My favorite cream-colored pants are ruined now, I thought, glancing down at them. They were covered with dust from the garage floor. I'll bet my shirt is ruined too. Clinging to the last bits of life, I tried to refocus my attention to something that might be helpful, but random reflections danced about in my head like swirling little enchantments. I wonder how long this is going to take. Is it going to hurt? I wonder if it will be dark. How much longer till it's over? Should I stop struggling now? I know there is no hope. The battle is lost. I was numb inside, avoiding the emotion of the sheer horror of what I had just endured and the reality that I was facing now. I tried to keep my mind occupied with matter-of-fact thoughts only. I'll just try not to breathe anymore. That way I won't realize that I can't breathe. and I won't panic. These were my last thoughts as I began to die that day. My life didn't flash before my eyes, and I didn't have any reflections about my loved ones. Although I was apprehensive, I wasn't as afraid as I thought I would have been. Instead, I just lay there flopping helplessly on my back. I could see my kicking feet and hear my body feverishly trying to get air. My last breath taken, all that remained were those sounds. Those god-awful gurgling sounds in my throat as I was being strangled to death. There was no fight left in me. The walls closed in around me, and darkness enveloped me. I strained for one more bit of breath, one more glimpse of the world, one more feeble attempt to cling to the life that I knew. Death hovered over me like an opaque fog. I tried to be brave and swallow my emotions, but I despaired. I mourned the inevitable loss of my tender 33 years of life. It was difficult to face the end, which had come so unexpectedly and violently. As I lay there dying, I submitted myself to fate. I remembered that day in church when I had walked down the aisle and publicly renounced the devil. I knew that I was in the valley at this very moment, but I also knew that because of that decision, I was not alone. With this thought, I rejoiced, and peace descended delicately upon me. Comfort wrapped me in its arms, and I confidently resigned from this life to the next. I relaxed my body, closed my eyes, and waited to meet Jesus. Thank you for watching.